you grew up in the 1950s or 60s, you know that our childhood didn't look anything like the padded, child-proof world of today. Our lives were governed by a long list of unwritten, ironclad rules. Today, society talks about gentle parenting and self-expression. But in our house, there was only one primary rule. A parent's word was the law, and it was not open for debate. We weren't oppressed, we were disciplined. We were little adults in training. Today we're going to look back at the strict norms that might seem like a prison sentence to a modern teenager, but were the very things that taught us respect, patience, and grit. How did we survive in a world where a single "but why" could lose you your dessert for a week, or a pair of dirty hands meant going to bed without supper? Let's step back into a time when no meant no, and your place in the world was clearly defined. Rule number 1. The sacred silence at the dinner table. Today's family dinner is often a chaotic scene, children buried in their phones, interrupting adults or leaving the table whenever they please. In 1954, that scenario would have resulted in an immediate, silent march to your bedroom. Dinner was the most important ritual of the day, and it had a strict protocol. The golden rule was simple. Children should be seen and not heard. We sat at that table with our backs straight, and we were not permitted to initiate a conversation. If father and mother were discussing politics, work, or the rising cost of groceries, we listened. We absorbed the adult world through our silence. You only opened your mouth for 2 reasons: to put food in it or to answer a direct question from a parent, and heaven forbid you answered with a mumble. Your response had to be clear, polite, and always end with "yes, sir" or "no, ma'am." It wasn't about suppressing our personalities. It was a lesson in humility and the art of listening. Rule number 2, the white glove hand inspection. Washing up for dinner wasn't a suggestion. It was a pre-meal military inspection. You couldn't just splash a little water on your palms and call it a day. Mother or father would personally inspect your knuckles, your fingernails, and the backs of your hands. If there was even a trace of backyard dirt, tree bark, or bicycle grease left on your skin, you were sent back to the bathroom to scrub with a bar of harsh, lye-heavy soap. Cleanliness was seen as a sign of respect for the labor mother put into the meal. To sit at the table, dirty, was considered the ultimate act of defiance. Rule number 3, the clean plate club, the no-waste dictatorship. We didn't have a kids' menu. There were no chicken nuggets or special crustless sandwiches made to order. You ate what was put in front of you. And this is where the most grueling rule of the kitchen came into play. You did not leave the table until your plate was absolutely clean. It didn't matter if it was overcooked, mushy Brussels sprouts, a slab of slippery liver and onions, or cold, congealed lima beans. We sat there for hours over a single plate long after everyone else had moved to the living room to watch the television. We would fall asleep at that table, but we knew the rule. Food cost money. Food was the result of father's hard work, and throwing it away was a sin. This rule taught us gratitude and endurance. We didn't know the word yuck. We only knew the word thank you. Rule number 4, Sunday, best in the torture of starch. Sunday was not a day of relaxation for a child. It was a day of maximum discipline. Your morning began by being squeezed into your Sunday best. For boys, this meant heavy wool trousers that itched like 1,000 needles, and a snow-white shirt starched until it felt like cardboard. The collar dug into your neck, and the clip-on tie felt like a noose. Girls suffered just as much in stiff crinoline petticoats, tight sashes, and patent leather shoes that were always half a size too small. But the most important rule of all, you were forbidden from playing in these clothes. After church, you were expected to sit in the living room like a porcelain statue. You couldn't sit on the grass, you couldn't run, and you couldn't even break a sweat. A single grass stain on a knee meant a multi-hour lecture on the value of property. We learned to control our bodies and take care of what we owned. Rule number 5, adults always go first. In the 50s, there was a very clear hierarchy. Adults were the kings and children were the subjects. If an adult entered the room, you stood up. If you were walking on the sidewalk and an elderly lady was approaching, you stepped off into the wet grass to give her the right of way. If a bus was crowded, a 10-year-old boy was expected to surrender his seat faster than he could think about it. And the most dangerous violation of all, you never, under any circumstances, called an adult by their first name. Even if it was your neighbor of 10 years, he was always Mr. Miller. To call him Bob was the equivalent of declaring war on all public morality. This rule created a distance of respect that has almost vanished today. We knew our place, which was at the very back of the line, and strangely, that gave us a sense of security. Rule number 6, the neighborhood surveillance system. Long before home security cameras and GPS tracking on smartphones, we were monitored by the most effective surveillance system ever devised, the Neighborhood Watch. But it wasn't a formal organization, it was just every single mother on the block. The rule was simple. If you were outside, you were being watched. If you did something wrong 3 blocks away from your house, whether it was throwing a rock, using a sassy tone of voice, or crossing a street you weren't supposed to, the news would travel faster than a lightning bolt. By the time you walked through your front door, your mother already knew exactly what you had done. And the most important part of this rule, any adult had the authority to discipline you. If a neighbor caught you misbehaving, they didn't call your parents to have a discussion. They scolded you on the spot, and then they told your parents, which meant you got disciplined twice. We lived with the constant, healthy fear that the eyes of the community were always on us. Rule number 7, the 4 scariest words. Wait until father gets home. In many 1950s households, mother was the daily peacekeeper, but father was the Supreme Court. If you committed a truly serious infraction during the day, mother would utter those 4 words that would make your stomach drop into your shoes. Wait until father gets home. This was a special kind of psychological torture. You had to spend the rest of the afternoon in a state of absolute dread, listening for the sound of his car pulling into the driveway and the heavy click of the front door latch. When father arrived, there was no time out or negotiation. You went to the basement or the garage, and you took your punishment like a man. Whether it was a wooden spoon, a heavy leather belt, or a firm hand, it was swift, it was painful, and it was final. But the most incredible thing by today's standards, after it was over, you were expected to dry your eyes, shake his hand, and say, "Thank you, sir, for the correction." We didn't resent the discipline, we respected the boundaries it created. Rule number 8, the outside until the streetlights mandate. We were governed by a very strict outdoor policy. Unless it was raining, snowing, or you were bleeding from a major artery, you were expected to be outside. Staying in the house during the day was considered a sign of laziness or illness. Mother would literally usher us out the door and lock it behind us. We wandered the woods, the vacant lots, and the back alleys for 10 hours straight without a single adult knowing our exact coordinates. But there was one non-negotiable life or death rule. Be home when the streetlights come on. That flickering orange or white glow from the pole at the corner was our universal alarm clock. If that light hit the pavement and your feet weren't crossing the threshold of your front door, you were in deep trouble. There were no excuses about losing track of time. You learned to read the position of the sun and the shadows of the trees because your freedom depended on it. Rule number 9, the etiquette of the telephone. Back then, the telephone was a heavy black piece of communal property, not a personal toy. Many of us lived on party lines, which meant you shared your phone line with several other families in the neighborhood. The rules were strict. You did not stay on the phone for more than 5 minutes, and you never, ever eavesdropped on a neighbor's conversation, though we all did at least once. If you wanted to use the phone, you picked up the receiver and listened. If Mrs. Higgins was discussing her pot roast recipe with her sister, you quietly hung up and waited 20 minutes. There was no call waiting. Using the phone was a privilege, not a right, and children were rarely allowed to use it at all unless it was for a genuine emergency or a polite 1-minute thank you to a grandparent. Rule number 10, the art of the thank you note. In the 50s, gratitude was a mandatory documented chore. If you received a birthday gift or a Christmas present, you were not allowed to play with that toy or spend that $5 bill until you had sat down at the kitchen table and written a formal handwritten thank you note. It didn't matter if you were 6 years old or 16. The letter had to be neat, the cursive had to be legible, and it had to be mailed within 48 hours. "I'll tell them next time I see them" was not an acceptable answer. This rule taught us that other people's kindness required effort on our part. It was a lesson in social grace that stayed with us for the rest of our lives. Rule number 11, the absolute authority of the teacher. In the 1950s, the teacher wasn't just an instructor. They were a godlike figure of authority. The rule was absolute. If the teacher said it, it was fact. If the teacher gave an order, you followed it instantly. There was no talking back and certainly no parent-teacher conferences to complain about a grade. In fact, if you got into trouble at school, you faced the double jeopardy rule. A phone call home from the principal didn't result in your parents defending you. It resulted in a second, much harsher punishment the moment you walked through your front door. Our parents and teachers were a united front. If you were wrong at school, you were wrong at home. Period. Rule number 12, the Board of Education, physical discipline. Modern schools have timeouts and counseling. But in our day, the primary tool of discipline was made of wood. Almost every principal had a heavy, flat wooden paddle, often with holes drilled through it to make it swing faster. It was nicknamed the Board of Education. If you were caught fighting, skipping class, or being persistently sassy, you were sent to the office to face the music. You bent over, gripped your knees, and took your licks. It was painful, it was humiliating, and most importantly, it was incredibly effective. You didn't leave that office feeling like a victim. You left feeling like you never wanted to see that paddle again. And the craziest part? We didn't sue the school. Our parents would just ask, "What did you do to deserve it?" Rule number 13, the no-handedness re-education. If you were born naturally left-handed in the early 50s, you encountered one of the strangest and strictest rules of the era. Left-handedness was often seen as a defect or a sign of poor coordination. In many classrooms, students were strictly forbidden from writing with their left hand. Teachers would literally tie a student's left hand behind their back or to the side of the chair, forcing them to use their right hand for every letter and number. We were forced to conform to a right-handed world, regardless of our biology. It was a frustrating, difficult process that today would be called trauma, but back then, it was just seen as proper training. Rule number 14, the cursive commandment. In our schools, penmanship was a graded subject just as important as math or history. You didn't just write to communicate, you wrote to demonstrate discipline. We were required to use fountain pens that leaked ink all over our fingers, and we had to master the Palmer method of cursive. There were strict rules about the slant of your letters, the loops of your L's, and the tail of your Y's. If your handwriting was messy, or if you dared to print your name instead of using cursive, your paper was torn up in front of you, and you were forced to stay after school to write lines on the chalkboard. "I will improve my penmanship 500 times" was a standard Friday afternoon activity. Rule number 15, the dress code of the scholar. Even in public schools, the dress code was a shadow of a military academy. Boys were forbidden from wearing blue jeans. Those were for farm work and manual labor, not the classroom. We wore slacks, tucked-in button-down shirts, and belts. If your shirt came untucked, you were reprimanded. Girls were strictly prohibited from wearing pants, regardless of how cold it was outside. They wore dresses or skirts that had to pass the kneeling test. If the hem didn't touch the floor when you knelt down, it was too short and you were sent home to change. This rule taught us that there was a time and a place for everything, and that looking the part was the first step toward being taken seriously. Rule number 16, playground squabbles, no adult interference. The playground had its own set of unwritten rules, and the most important one was, settle it yourself. Recess duty teachers were there to make sure no one actually died, but they weren't there to mediate your feelings. If two boys had a disagreement over a game of kickball, they settled it with a shouting match or, occasionally, a brief scuffle behind the equipment shed. You didn't run to the teacher to tattle. Tattling was a social death sentence. You learned to stand your ground, you learned to negotiate, and you learned how to win and lose with some measure of dignity. The law of the playground was our first real-world lesson in conflict resolution. When the school bell finally rang, the heavy wooden doors swung open, and we changed out of our stiff school clothes, we entered a completely different universe. There was no helicopter parenting in the 1950s. Once we stepped off the front porch, we were completely off the grid. Our parents didn't know where we were, who we were with, or what we were doing. And frankly, they didn't want to know, as long as we were home when the streetlights came on. But the freedom we had came with a level of physical danger that would give a modern safety inspector a heart attack. We didn't have soft silicone toys or padded playrooms. We played with heavy metal, toxic chemicals, and actual explosives. This was the era of the backyard war, and we were all frontline soldiers. Segment 1, the chemical playground. Let's start with the things we handled with our bare hands. Today, if a glass thermometer accidentally breaks in a house, people treat it like a level 4 hazmat emergency. They evacuate the room and call poison control. What did we do in the 1950s? When a thermometer broke, it was a neighborhood event. Mother would just sigh, sweep the shattered glass away, and let us play with the liquid mercury right there on the kitchen table or the dirt path. We would spend hours pushing those fascinating shiny silver beads together with our bare fingers, watching them absorb into one another. We had absolutely no idea we were playing with a highly toxic neurotoxin. To us, it was just magic liquid metal, and the chemical exposure didn't stop there. If you were a lucky boy on Christmas morning, you might unwrap a genuine chemistry set, not the safe baking soda and vinegar kits they sell today. We had sets like the infamous Gilbert Atomic Energy Lab, which actually included real radioactive uranium-bearing ores and a working Geiger counter. We were mixing highly volatile, unlabeled powders in glass beakers on our bedroom desks, creating terrible smells and minor explosions, all while breathing in the fumes. Even our holiday decorations were lethal. That beautiful, fluffy, artificial snow we sprinkled all over the branches of our Christmas trees. It was made of pure, raw asbestos fibers. We slept in bedrooms coated in thick lead paint, and we survived it all. Segment 2, explosive experiments and Roman candle wars. If the chemicals didn't get us, the neighborhood artillery surely would. We didn't just play with toys, we played with actual military-grade ordnance. A trip to the roadside firework tent was a rite of passage, and there was no strict age verification. For a few crumpled dollar bills, a 10-year-old could walk away with a brown paper bag full of massive red M80s and authentic cherry bombs. These weren't the weak, sparkling firecrackers of today. These were miniature sticks of dynamite with very short, unpredictable green fuses. We blew up heavy galvanized metal trash cans, we melted our plastic army men into puddles of burning plastic, and we threw them into the local creek just to watch the water erupt. But the ultimate test of courage was the neighborhood Roman candle war. On a dark summer night, two groups of boys would stand on opposite sides of a suburban street, light the ends of long cardboard tubes, and actively shoot blazing balls of colored fire directly at each other's chests. We used wooden garbage can lids as shields, dodging literal fireballs in the pitch black. And where were our parents during this chaotic, fiery battlefield? They were sitting right there on the front lawn in their aluminum folding chairs, drinking a beer, watching the whole thing happen. As long as we didn't burn the house down or lose an eye, it was just considered boys being boys. Segment 3, extreme sports and self-built speed. Our need for speed was equally unregulated. If you wanted a go-kart, you didn't buy a safe, battery-operated plastic car from a department store. You went to the garage, found some splintered plywood, stole the heavy metal wheels off an old baby pram, and built it yourself. We called them soapbox racers. We would drag these heavy, crude wooden contraptions to the top of the steepest asphalt hill in town, climb in, and let gravity take over. The catch? We almost never bothered to build brakes. You stopped by dragging the thick rubber soles of your canvas sneakers on the pavement until they smoked, or you crashed into a neighbor's hedge. We took the skin off our knees, picked the gravel out of our palms, and went right back up the hill. The toys we bought from the store weren't much safer. Every boy dreamed of owning a heavy wood and metal Daisy Red Ryder lever-action BB gun. We roamed the woods and vacant lots like snipers, lining up curved green glass Coca-Cola bottles on wooden fences and shattering them into a million razor-sharp pieces. We didn't wear safety goggles. We shot at hard brick walls, watching the solid copper BBs violently ricochet right back at our heads. Even the public playgrounds were a brutal survival test. There was no soft rubber matting or wood chips under the equipment. It was pure, unforgiving asphalt or hard-packed dirt. We climbed 10-foot-high metal monkey bars and hung upside down by our knees over solid concrete. We piled 10 kids onto a rusty metal merry-go-round and spun it so fast that the weakest link would literally fly off into the dirt. We survived the blazing hot metal slides that burned the backs of our legs in July, and we survived the heavy iron swings that could knock your teeth out if you walked in front of them. We were a generation forged in dirt, rust, and completely unsupervised risk. We didn't just play, we survived our playtime. And looking back, we wouldn't trade that terrifying, beautiful freedom for anything in the world.